world. Idea number one, the one that has already changed the world, is the idea of heliocentrism, which is a big scientific word that means that the sun is the center of our galaxy. So for many, many years, as long as there have been people, and people have looked at the sky, they thought that everything revolved around us. And it makes sense. If you look at the movement of the moon across the sky, or the sun, if you're hopefully not looking directly at it, or even the stars, they seem to move around where we're standing, right? And even though they do appear differently in the sky, they move with the seasons, they still seem to orbit us. And so for centuries and centuries, those who thought about such things, which probably wasn't everybody, I don't imagine 100% of the people in human history looked up at the moon and said, that's orbiting around me. But enough people did that the general understanding was that we were in the center, and everything else up there, all the celestial bodies, all the heavenly bodies, the moon and sun and stars and all of that, revolved around us. Now, do you know which scientist put that to bed? Who came in and said, no, no, no? Any guesses? Pardon? That was what I thought until I did a little research, but that's an excellent guess. It's the other guy. It's Copernicus. Yep. So it was Copernicus. Now, when do you think the theory of anthropocentrism, when it basically means that things revolve around us or the earth, when do you think that went away to our modern understanding? Any guesses? What century? Pardon? Who said 1600s? Beth, you win the prize. Now I just have to figure out what that prize is going to be. I have a nice red pen with that. 1600, 16th century, which really isn't that long ago, right? If you think about it, I mean, it is. None of us were alive to see that. But it really wasn't that long ago that people used to think that everything revolved around us. And then Copernicus showed up and said, if you look real closely, we are orbiting the sun, as is a lot of other things. And it was a big deal, a really big deal. And the year that theory was published was the same year that Copernicus died. So either the stress was too much for him, he got a lot of hate, and he's just like, can't take it. Or he knew he was dying, and he thought, rather than suffering the slings and arrows of all the abuse, I'm going to publish this and then just go on my merry way. And so if you've got an unpopular theory to publish, maybe wait to do it, and that way you don't have to deal with the fallout. Right. So, but think this through with me. Why? Think it through either politically or theologically and socially and all of that stuff. Why would that be a big deal? Why did that throw things into upheaval, especially in the church?
It makes the universe a lot bigger.
Yeah. The universe, number one, is a lot bigger. And what else?
Makes the earth much less important.
Yeah, the earth is much less important if all of a sudden it's just one of either 8 or 9 planets, depending on how they're defined. And who is no longer at the very center of everything? Me. And you, right. Now think about that. Thousands of years of thinking is that we here on this planet, us human beings, are the very center of things. And we're important enough that everything revolves around us. And pardon? Yeah, and that's the kicker in this is even though we're like, well, that's ancient thinking, I would argue that many, many people still think that way, that the universe revolves around me, that everything happens because of me. And this threw the world into upheaval. This brand new thinking, scientifically, they had to rethink things. And they used to think that gravity worked because we were the center and everything pulled towards the center. But then they had to say, well, what does it mean if we're not exactly the center? changed science. But it also really changed the church and theology, because all of a sudden, science is telling us that we're not the center of the universe. And that went up against the biblical accounts, right? So all of a sudden we have the beginning of science and religion not exactly getting along and all of that. But it really challenged our understanding of humans. Are we the center of all creation, with everything revolving around us? Think about it this way. We're going to go from circles to imagining a pyramid. People, for just about as long as there have been people, have been obsessed with wanting to be at the top of the pyramid. Think about who we celebrate today. Who are the kinds of people that we look at and laud, L-A-U-D, and celebrate today? They tend to be wealthy, right? Famous. What else? Good business people. Rich, beautiful, all of that stuff. They're the people who generally society would say those people are at the tippy top of the pyramid. And so if there's a small group of people at the top of the pyramid, what about the people below them? What are they there for? Yeah, to hold up the top. So hold on to that image. So first big idea is that humans and the earth are not the center of the universe. And that changed things. It changed things in the church. It changed things in society. It changed things in science. Now, the second big idea that has the potential to change the world as much as that first idea did is, and I want a drum roll. Somebody give me a drum roll, because this is a big deal. Oh, nicely done. Okay. It is service. Was that a letdown? It feels like that was a letdown. Servitude, serving, servanthood. Yeah. Drum roll leading into that word service didn't feel appropriate, but maybe by the end of the next 10 minutes, maybe it'll feel like a drum roll wasn't enough. Now, service, I want to define, is not just like holding the door open for somebody. Service is that. I mean, that's a little bit of it. That's being kind. But being a servant is really about posture. And what I mean by that, not just bodily posture, even though I do think at times that comes into play, but the position where we place ourselves in relationship to other things, other people and beyond. So historically, we have wanted to be where? Top of the pyramid. Right. And those beneath the top of the pyramid were the unfortunate ones. And everyone beneath the peak of the pyramid existed, whether or not they wanted to prop up the peak of it. Everything and everyone exists to worship and to look up to the people at the tippy top. And that's the goal, right? We want to be at the peak. We want to be wealthy and good businessmen, and on the cover of magazines, business women too. Don't mean to be genderist there. And then we have this incredible passage, this story of Jesus, where he comes in to a world that had as much segregation and pyramiding, that's not a real word, as we do today. Where there were people who were the wealthy elites, who had power, who had beauty, who had fame, who had money. Jesus steps into that environment, and the disciples wanted him to ascend to the top of the pyramid, right? They were like, our people are being subjected. Our people do not have enough power. We want you to step up and claim that power, because obviously you're somebody special. We want you to have might and wealth and make things better for us. And so Jesus did something else, didn't he? He went Pardon? He went to their feet. In this moment where they wanted him to climb the ladder, what he did instead was this. He descended. He came down. Sorry, people. And then he knelt down. And he washed their feet. I don't know if I think we can, but it takes some intentionality to understand how radical and how powerful that is. That when the disciples were looking to Jesus for how to live, what it means to live a life of holiness, to walk in the way that leads to life, what he told them to do was to kneel at people's feet. It was the servant's job. Right. I think this matters today. It matters for a lot of reasons, but in our current context, I don't know how many of you suffered through the debate a couple nights ago. If we think about our political environment, yeah, it's tragic, it's sad, but there's a lot of sad aspects to it. But verse 3 from Philippians that Sue read for us this morning, hear this, and then think about all the various candidates and politicians and stuff these days. Do nothing from selfish ambition. Yeah, insert laughter here. Or conceit. Insert laughter here again, yes. But in humility, right, insert incredulous noise here. Regard others as better than yourselves. I think one of the things that is tragic is that politicians on both sides have postured as Christian and yet don't embody what it means to serve. And isn't that part of the problem? We have folks who will gladly stand up for picture opportunities, and sometimes they hold the Bible right way up. On occasion, it's upside down. Not talking about anybody specifically. And I will say that I'm not sure Democrats are a whole lot better about this. I think they use religious language and religious symbolism to manipulate our votes to make us say, those are my kind of people. But what I don't see often is the heart of a servant. Just plain and simple. I will say that probably our most recent person who does embody the heart of a servant, and I admit extreme bias in this because I'm from Georgia, is maybe Jimmy Carter. And by all accounts, even though he ascended to the presidency, he was a pretty bad president in some ways because I think he was a good person. And we can look at what he did after his term as president, where there's a misconception. He didn't start Habitat for Humanity, by the way. It was already a thing, but he brought it to prominence and championed it. And even up until a few years ago, you could frequently find him with a tool belt around his waist, swinging a hammer. And it's this. This is what Jesus was trying to enact and embody and reveal and teach and lead us towards, is that if we are going to make it as a humanity, then we have to learn an entirely new way of being human. Because the old way that's been around since there were people is the haves and the have-nots, the people at the top of the pyramid who are strong and wealthy, and everyone else existing beneath them. Well, it's not working so well. It just leads to suffering and people being subjected to all sorts of things. There's actually in the Gospels, there's two stories of feet washing. We have the one where Jesus kneels at the feet of the disciples, but we also have Mary Magdalene, washing his feet in preparation for burial. And that clues us in that when their feet are washed, sometimes it's a hospitality thing, but it's also symbolically a preparation for burial. And so when Jesus washes the disciples' feet, yes, it is a servant thing. It is a hospitality thing. When a guest was to come into your house back then, you were to wash their feet, wash their hands. But it was also how you prepared a body for burial. And I think we can't ignore that aspect of it as well, because I think what Jesus was trying to say to the disciples is, you've got to get ready to die. But not an actual physical death, at least not yet. I mean, we all have to deal with that someday. But what he was preparing them for, I would argue, is a spiritual death and rebirth. Because they still didn't quite get it. They still had it in their heads and in their hearts that to be great was to have power. To be great was to have wealth, was to have military might and status and stature in society. And Jesus said, you must die to that old way. And that old way is what we still see today, where people are saying, me first and me best. Right? Me first, me best. And Jesus was saying, you've got to die to that and be born anew into a new way. The way that leads to life, which is the way of the servant. And we don't like that word, servant. Why not? It has a connotation that it's demeaning, right? Why else don't we like it? It rubs us the wrong way, almost everybody, at least a little bit, because the culture we're raised in tells us that to be a servant means you're a loser. You're second class, that you're beneath others. And that language is used a lot. But according to Jesus, the title of servant, well, there is none better. If Jesus were to appear here today and walk over to Stu and say, oh, Stu, my beloved child, what a true servant you are, there would be no higher compliment. It's the most glorious title that could ever be bestowed upon us. Gospel of Matthew has him saying, you could probably do this from memory, whoever wants to be great must become a servant. Whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave. This is what the Son of Man has done. He came to serve, not be served, to give away his life in exchange for the many who are held hostage. It's not wishy-washy. It's not hard to interpret. It's just that centuries of humanness have taught us something that's not right. Now, there's two bits of good news in all of this call to servanthood. The first bit of good news here is that wrapped up in all of this is the fact that the world can change. We know it can change for the worse. I think sometimes we feel like we're watching that happen daily. But it can also change for the better. That though we may be on a destructive path, we can get on a redemptive path. And despite what certain politicians and advertisers and companies want you to think, because they prey on apathy, if you are apathetic and depressed and hopeless, then you are easy to sell stuff to, or easy to get your vote from. And I want you to be really aware of that if you feel crappy, that is intended. Because if you feel bad, it's easy for advertisers to go, you know what would make you feel better? This car, this protein shake, this insert just about every product that exists here. And when you feel depressed and hopeless or scared and all of that stuff, that's right when politicians pop in and say, guess who has the answer to your depression, your fear, your feelings of worthlessness? And it just so happens to be me. Never heard a politician say, you know who's good for you? The other candidate. The powers that be want us to believe that the world can't change. Empire wants us to think that the world can't change. But it can. It absolutely can. If it can change for the worse, it can change for the better. And not through violence and not through manipulation, but through service. It's sort of the one thing we've never tried. In fact, this is the only way it will change. When we as a people stop trying to climb over one another and get to the top of that pyramid, but to learn to kneel and to serve. And I think this is where we as a church must lead the way. We should be experts in this. And in some ways we are, but I think we can always learn. As a church, we exist to serve. We don't exist to stand in judgment of others at all. We don't exist to act superior. We don't act as if we have a right to play God and declare what is acceptable and what is not. We exist to serve, to embody Christ the servant, remembering the lost and least in particular. And in this, we can change the world. Despite how we feel sometimes, we are not powerless. Hear that. We are not powerless in any way. And it makes me think of Mary Oliver, the poet's question from that one poem. Tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I think Jesus might say, maybe a good answer to that would be serve. And I can hear someone's cynical thought saying, well, what good will one act of service do? And it's a fair question, even though I would say part of our challenge as modern church people is to fight against that cynical voice that's in all of us, myself included. The truth is that we have to remember that big change is made up of little changes. And that big change really can't happen without many, many small changes. How many people are in favor of child labor? Raise your hand. Bob, I can't believe you raised your hand. No, I'm kidding. None of us raise our hand. Of course we're not in favor of child labor, even though I will say there's some states right now that are changing their laws in favor to make it easier for child labor to happen, which is bonkers. I don't know what word to use other than bonkers. I mean, there's plenty of other words. I just don't feel comfortable saying them up here. But you were like, well, what can one person do? Well, I think we examine what we purchase, right? We try to figure out if what we are buying use child labor. And then we make sure that as we purchase, use our purchasing power, that we're smart about it, that we're wise and faithful about it. And it's just one person, but what if Lori then talks to Mackie about it? And Mackie's like, you know what? I agree with that. I'll make sure that what I buy doesn't come from that. And then Mackie's circle of friends, she talks to them about it, and all of a sudden you've got 5 people doing it. And then we have an entire congregation doing it, and then 2 congregations. And then as the word gets out, all of a sudden something begins to have power. And we can force companies to change. If they see their profits go way down, they're going to change. But it begins small, right? It begins with one person. Well, think about it this way. Scientists and experts, since they've been tracking this, have noted, especially in the past 10, 20 years, the incredible rise of anxiety in people. And they attribute this sort of anxious spirit that infects most of our country, not to social media or the television, but to the lack of actual, real community. That we, number one, as people, we evolved, we grew in families, in villages, and tribes where we were bound together. And we don't have that anymore. We don't. I mean, my parents are across the country. My in-laws are over there. I mean, most of us, our children are way over here, and we don't have that anymore. And so deep down inside, it makes us feel vulnerable. Because we realize, whether or not we think it actively, but deep down inside, we're like, well, if I don't have anyone around me, aunts, uncles, parents, children, village, tribe, community, all of that stuff, then it's me and only me that's responsible for my own security and welfare. And we know that health changes. And we know that fortunes change, and each one of us is probably one bad thing happening away from being really, really vulnerable. And it fills us with anxiety. And again, that's where all the politicians and marketers come in and said, I can help your anxiety. Buy an Acura. That'll help. That'll help, right? But we fall for it because we want something to relieve this incredible anxiety. But what if this were possible? What if somebody came to you and said, Maggie, no matter what happens in your life, you go bankrupt, your health changes, I will make sure that you're never alone. You will never go hungry. You will never have thirst. You will always have a bed and a roof and somebody to support you. Now, what if there was 2 people who said that to you? And then 5, and then 10, and then 20. It begins with one person serving another, making a change. And then all of a sudden, big things change. What if we had a society or even congregations where we made that kind of commitment to one another and then taught it and shared it? Here's how we create a less anxious community. You know, this is an aside, but they have determined that the one thing that helps addicts more than anything, anyone know what it is? A dog? Well, in a way, yeah. I mean, that's kind of the one thing they've said, that when people are addicts, the one factor that when they get clean and stay clean is community. That part of where addiction comes from is being alone. And that's all kind of an aside, but I want us to understand that one act of service, one act of caring is where things start. The second bit of good news, and then I'll wrap it up because I know this has been a long one, is that there are a lot of churches out there who will tell you that in order to be right with God, you have to believe certain things. You have to believe certain doctrine. You have to look a certain way. You have to wear certain clothes. You have to act a certain way. And if you don't meet all those criteria, well, sorry for you. There are folks who will tell you that to be right with God means that you have to never ask questions or not even have questions, and that you have to have all perfect assurance, and that you have to read the right version of the Bible, which I think strangely is always the King James. Never seems to be NRSV. Revised edition. And if you can't do all of that, then you're not right with God. What we hear today is a reminder that, number one, we're always right with God, in a way. But secondly, that if we want to make God's heart smile, and that sounds like childish language, but I don't know how else to say it. It's something my kids picked up from a cartoon they used to watch. Even as we are beloved, always beloved, if we genuinely, in faith and love, want to make God's heart smile, we don't have to memorize doctrine. We don't have to read the King James Version. We don't have to attend one specific church or denomination. Making God's heart smile is as easy and as obtainable as positioning ourselves, as assuming the posture of a servant. And as we do so, make no mistake, as each of us does so, as we position ourselves in turn as a servant, as we kneel, as we wash feet, the world begins to change. The world begins to change, and by God's grace, so do we. And so from our hearts and our lips to God's ears, we pray, may it be so, and amen. That was a long one. Sorry about that.